Sequence of returns risk is one of the biggest risks to your retirement that most people don't think about. It's also pretty easy to manage if you're aware of it. Sequence of returns risk is pretty much what it sounds like. It's the risk to your retirement based on what happens to your investments at different points in time, especially right around retirement. A lot of people generally don't worry too much about when exactly they get the investment returns that they're gonna get. We all know that A times B times C is the same thing as C times B times A. You're gonna get the same answer no matter which way you do the math. But this is only true if you're working with a lump sum of money. If you had a pool of money to invest at a specific point in the past, and then you just let it run without touching it. Now, I don't know about you, but that doesn't sound too much like my situation, or pretty much anyone else that I know. We may not want to be making adjustments to our allocation all that often, but there's always stuff happening. Since I'm still working, I've got my savings going in my portfolio pretty regularly, and hopefully the same is true for you if you're still working. But if you're retired, you've also got money coming out of your portfolio on a pretty regular schedule. And because of that money going in or out, the timing of your investment returns matters. Depending on when those returns hit, your portfolio is going to look different, and the importance of those returns for your overall retirement income plan will also be different. And to be specific, the closer to your retirement date an investment return hits, the more impact it will have on your retirement. There's two big reasons for this. The first is optionality, basically how flexible you and your situation are. And the second really comes down to what your future cash flows will look like. But let's start with the optionality piece first. The basic idea is that when you're young, you've got a lot of time to deal with any bad returns that you may experience. Not only does the market tend to go up over time, so your investments will tend to recover naturally over time as well, but you can also change what you're doing. If you're still working and you hit a run of bad returns, you could theoretically start saving more in the future to make up for them. And the more time until retirement, the more time both of these factors have to work, and the bigger effect you'll see. On the other hand, if you're older, say in retirement or very near to it, you don't really have as much flexibility with these factors. If you're retired, you can certainly reduce your spending, but you usually can't really add more money into your portfolio in most situations. And if you are still working, but you're going to be retiring in the next year or two, the amount of extra saving that you can do is probably not going to move the needle all that much compared to the rest of your portfolio. And more to the point, you're going to be looking to use that money to live off of in the near future. So you don't have the same luxury of waiting the markets out and counting on them to recover over the long term. The second point, though, what your future cash flows look like is the big driver here. It's probably not earth-shattering to say that your investment portfolio is going to be at its largest right at retirement. You've been saving up for your entire career. You've hopefully been getting some decent investment returns to help you out. And retirement is the point where you flip the switch and start using that money you've worked so hard to save up. Well, the returns you get at this point, where your portfolio is the largest it's ever been, and likely the largest it's ever going to be, are pretty important. If nothing else, those returns are going to impact the most amount of money. A good way to see this is to think about what would happen if you had a really big market downturn hit when you first started saving. We'll leave aside the question of when that happened to be. And I can actually use myself as an example here. I graduated from college in 2005 and had just started my career when 2008 hit. And my father's an economics professor, so I've had the importance of compounding drummed into me from a young age. So I started saving pretty much immediately. Now, I was working in a mutual fund company at the time, so 2008 and its aftermath was kind of a big deal, as you might expect, but from a purely selfish investment standpoint, it didn't actually have a huge impact on me. I had only just started putting money away, and my contributions weren't exactly huge. No one likes the market dropping like that, and I would have a little bit more in my portfolio if it didn't happen. But I just didn't have all that much invested for those ugly returns to work on. And even more importantly, my savings since then have completely swamped what I had in there back in 2008. On the other hand, the people who were planning on retiring in 2008, or even worse, the ones who retired in 2007, had a vastly different experience. Their retirements were fundamentally different than they were expecting simply because of how their retirements lined up with what the markets were doing. The market drop hit their portfolios at their largest points. Not only had they done all of their savings, but they were starting to take their money out. It wasn't so much that 2008 happened. If you're going to put your money in the stock market, you have to assume that things like that will happen at some point. It was when it happened that was so painful for these people. Though it is worth pointing out that this works both ways. Good returns at the start of your retirement can really help, just as much as bad returns hurt your retirement. But from a planning perspective, we care about the downside here. Yeah, good returns are great. They mean that your plan might have a little bit higher probability of success, or you might be able to leave a little bit more behind for your heirs, or maybe you can increase your spending a little bit. But the downside hurts more. And most of us are generally pretty simple. We want to avoid that pain. So what can we do about sequence risk? Other than simply spending less, which, just like planning on working longer, does tend to make the math pencil out a little bit better. Well, there are three main approaches that you can use. You can use variable spending strategies, you can use buffer assets, or you can reduce the risk in your investment portfolio. Let's talk through each of these quickly. The first one, using a variable spending strategy, is pretty much what it sounds like. Basically, you have a base level of spending, but you vary that spending through time based on what's going on around you. There's all sorts of different techniques that you can use. Wade actually has a whole chapter on using variable spending strategies to manage sequence risk in his book, How Much Can I Spend in Retirement? And there's a link in the description below to all of his books, as well as in the Retirement Planning Guidebook. But they all basically boil down to, in a good year, you might be able to spend a little bit more, and after a bad year, you might want to be pulling back and spending a little bit less. If you can be flexible in your spending, it can go a long way towards managing that sequence risk, as it means you're taking less money out right after the market drops. Now, going along with this, you can also look into buffer assets. Buffer assets are assets that you hold outside of your investment portfolio that aren't earmarked for specific spending, like the bulk of your investment portfolio. You can use these assets to, well, serve as a buffer against bad market returns. Basically, when the market is down, you can tap these assets to reduce the amount that you would have had to take out to fund your spending. The trick with buffer assets is that because they need to be kept isolated from the market, so they don't have the same issues with sequence risk, there's a big trade-off here. Those buffered assets need to be very conservative. So the more buffer assets you keep, the less sensitive you are to sequence risk, but you also have less overall growth in your portfolio. And as always, we've got an article on buffer assets down in the description if you want to dive into this more. Alternatively, you can just reduce the level of risk in your investment portfolio right around retirement, when your sequence of returns risk is highest, and then bring your allocation back up to its quote-unquote normal level a few years later. From my experience, this is a really popular approach. A less risky portfolio means a lower chance of really bad returns. However, just like with the buffer assets, it does mean that your portfolio is likely going to have lower overall growth. You don't want to be so conservative that you put your plan at risk, but decreasing your ratio of stocks to bonds can go a long way towards managing your sequence returns risk. Sequence risk is one of the biggest risks that most retirees don't think too much about. But a well-constructed plan can help you deal with it effectively and keep you moving towards the retirement that you deserve. And if you want to find out what other risks to your retirement that you should be thinking about, take a look at our free ebook, The 7 Risks of Retirement Planning. You can download it for free by going to retirementresearcher.com/7risks. It's here on screen, and we've also got it linked down in the description below. Planning for retirement isn't easy, and there are a lot of things to watch out for. So making sure that you understand what those challenges are is essential to creating the plan that works for you. If this was helpful, be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel so you can see what we're up to. If you have any questions on this or any other questions you'd like me to address, just drop them in the comments below. You can also check us out on the web at retirementresearcher.com and make sure to sign up for our weekly newsletter to keep up to date with everything that we're doing.